Say to the people who say, Sophie Cunningham, she shoots those three-pointers, makes them look like free throws.
I'm like, good. That's what I get paid to do. I should.
You do get paid.
Barely.
The basketball world genuinely believed the Indiana Fever had finally cracked the code and assumed that after an absolutely grueling season defined by record-shattering viewership numbers, overwhelming national attention, and extraordinary internal pressure, the front office was completely ready to construct a rock-solid, truly unstoppable music empire around their prized franchise centerpiece. But behind firmly closed doors, a massive, totally unprecedented storm is violently brewing that directly music threatens to completely rip the entire organization apart from the inside out before their dynasty even remotely gets off the ground. When management abruptly dismissed head coach Christy Sides, fans all across the country erupted in absolute celebration, genuinely convinced the exhausting era of deeply questionable rotations, baffling late-game decisions, and completely incoherent offensive schemes was permanently finished and long overdue. Everyone assumed the road was entirely cleared for a forward-thinking modern coaching staff that would finally unleash the players, push the tempo relentlessly, and utterly dominate the entire league. The front office boldly promised a sweeping culture overhaul, a fearless new direction, music, and a highly creative system specifically engineered to elevate their young, explosively talented superstars to genuine championship contention. But what the executives deliberately and conveniently refused to reveal was that music, their grand, deeply secretive master plan, involved importing a voice that would violently disrupt the carefully established locker room chemistry and ignite a massive, completely undeniable wave of internal resistance from the players themselves. Whispers and burning rumors began spreading almost immediately that the front office was frantically scrambling, hopelessly disorganized, and making enormous franchise-defining decisions without ever genuinely bothering to consult the cornerstone players who are the ones actually required to step onto the hardwood and sacrifice their bodies every single night. The mainstream sports media aggressively framed the coaching change as a straightforward, perfectly logical upgrade, a necessary step forward for a maturing roster that simply needed slightly more structure and accountability. But the actual reality described by trusted league insiders paints a genuinely terrifying, deeply volatile portrait of a franchise drowning in absolute, total chaos with star players allegedly feeling completely blindsided, entirely disrespected, and pushed dangerously close to their absolute breaking point by a group of executives who appear hopelessly disconnected from the reality of today's modern game. For one brief, fleeting moment, it genuinely appeared as though peace and long-awaited stability might finally descend upon Indianapolis. But that comforting illusion was violently shattered into countless pieces the precise moment. The front office began deliberately leaking their true intentions directly to the waiting press. And what unfolded next would immediately set off a catastrophic domino effect of deep-seated frustration, strategically leaked rumors, and alleged locker room ultimatums that absolutely nobody across the entire basketball world ever saw coming. The exact instant Stephanie White's name was officially connected to the Indiana Fever head coaching vacancy. The entire atmosphere inside the practice facility shifted dramatically from hopeful, buzzing anticipation to a suffocating, deeply unsettling anxiety because absolutely anyone with genuine knowledge of recent WNBA history understands precisely what kind of fiercely demanding, completely uncompromising environment she creates. White is an undeniable basketball icon, a deeply cherished former Fever player who intimately understands the relentless pressure of the city and the sky-high expectations of the passionate fan base. And she most recently guided the Connecticut Sun with a gritty, physically punishing, old-school mentality that demands absolute perfection and total unquestioning obedience to her intricate defensive systems. But there exists a glaring, completely unavoidable, truly enormous problem that the front office executives somehow willfully chose to entirely ignore when executing this heavily publicized hire, which is the undeniable objective reality that her rigidly structured, deliberately slow-paced, half-court, grind-heavy system is the polar opposite of everything this young, supremely explosive Indiana roster was carefully constructed to execute. White built her formidable coaching reputation on relentless perimeter defense, painstakingly meticulous play calling, and a tightly controlled sideline culture where players are strictly expected to function as highly disciplined soldiers executing precise orders rather than expressive creative athletes trusted to improvise freely, a coaching philosophy that entirely and completely smothers the modern run-and-gun, high-octane style that today's newest generation of basketball talent genuinely thrives on. Players throughout the entire league know with absolute certainty That suiting up for White means enduring an intense, merciless daily microscope where every single defensive breakdown, music, is ruthlessly dissected in film sessions, every freelance or premature shot selection is harshly criticized, and individual offensive creativity is completely surrendered for the collective benefit of the defensive scheme. For a veteran-laden, battle-hardened music team desperately grinding for ugly, low-scoring postseason victories in the trenches, that approach might actually function perfectly. But for a roster absolutely bursting with young, supremely athletic, high-powered offensive weapons, placing that music, kind of suffocating, incredibly restrictive leash around them is a guaranteed recipe for a complete locker room catastrophe. The front office somehow genuinely convinced themselves that importing a recognizable, nostalgic face with a tough love philosophy would magically and instantaneously resolve their persistent defensive vulnerabilities and forcefully push the young core toward overnight maturity, remaining completely blind to the painfully obvious reality that modern music, enormously paid, massively celebrated superstars absolutely refuse to be treated like disposable pawns, music, on a rigid tactical chessboard. The locker room was reportedly left in complete shock by the looming decision, understanding almost immediately that the free-spirited, high-scoring, wildly entertaining brand of basketball they desperately craved to establish was about to be forcibly dismantled by punishing music, relentless defensive drills, and a deliberately slow, entirely and oppressively micromanaged defensive system. It became glaringly, unmistakably obvious to absolutely everyone paying close attention that management was aggressively attempting to force a square peg into a round hole, strangely prioritizing franchise nostalgia and outdated old-school toughness over genuine, meaningful stylistic compatibility on the actual court. Music, ultimately laying the groundwork for a massive, deeply destructive ideological war between the incoming coaching staff and the franchise's cornerstone star players. But if the management team genuinely believed the roster was simply going to silently, obediently absorb this enormous culture shock and fall completely into line without mounting a serious fight, they were absolutely and completely dead wrong. Because the fierce, burning pushback was about to begin at the very top of the entire food chain. Caitlin Clark did not merely survive her enormously publicized rookie season. She endured a relentless, punishing physical and psychological gauntlet that pushed her dangerously close to the very edge of her absolute limits. Absorbing a massive physical punishment, music, that would have permanently destroyed the confidence of most experienced, battle-tested veterans. From the very instant she stepped onto the professional court for her highly anticipated debut, she was aggressively targeted. Music, brutally shoved, repeatedly bruised, and relentlessly hunted by opposing defenders who were absolutely determined to welcome her to the professional ranks with sustained, borderline reckless physicality, ultimately leaving her thoroughly drained and desperately craving a coaching system that would genuinely protect her and properly showcase her generational, truly unprecedented talent. During her legendary time at Iowa, she consistently and brilliantly thrived inside a system deeply built, music, on complete, unquestioned offensive freedom, a blazing fast transition tempo, and a head coach who fundamentally music trusted her to accurately survey the floor, execute brilliant split-second decisions, and fearlessly pull up from mid-court logo range without any hesitation or constant fear of being immediately yanked from the game for a single imperfect decision. But playing under Christie's sides, she was repeatedly spotted looking visibly and intensely frustrated by painfully clunky play calling, completely telegraphed half-court sets, and a total absence of meaningful floor spacing, leading absolutely everybody to confidently assume the next head coaching hire would unquestionably be a forward-thinking offensive genius singularly focused on fully unlocking her explosive, completely unrestricted potential. Instead, music. The front office seemingly surrendered the keys to the entire franchise to a coach deeply and widely notorious for her heavily structured, brutally grinding, low-scoring, half-court brand of basketball, entirely dismissing the glaring reality that Clark's greatest, most undeniable superpower is her extraordinary ability to brilliantly operate within chaos, aggressively music, dictate the game's tempo, and completely dismantle opposing defenses in blazing fast-break transition, before they can even begin to properly organize their half-court defensive assignments. Intense rumors immediately exploded across social media platforms and league circles that Clark and her trusted inner circle were heavily and deeply frustrated by the puzzling direction the franchise was pursuing, allegedly feeling that the front office executives were completely and catastrophically failing to surround her with the right supportive infrastructure, the right fast-paced system, and the right coaching philosophy absolutely necessary to fully maximize her historic, league transforming skill set. She didn't simply want a new head coach. She desperately needed a genuine collaborative partner, someone who fundamentally understood that the future of the entire WNBA is blindingly fast, supremely explosive, and inherently creative, not suffocatingly bogged down by antiquated, old-school mentalities that dangerously treat offensive brilliance and deep three-point shooting as a defensive liability. The intensifying whispers of her growing dissatisfaction sent absolute shockwaves rippling throughout the entire league because a disgruntled, deeply unhappy franchise player possessing a massive, completely undeniable global platform represents an executive's single worst nightmare, particularly when that specific player is nearly single-handedly responsible for the team's staggering, unprecedented financial explosion, skyrocketing merchandise revenue, and perpetually sold-out arenas, stretching across the entire country. Clark has always carried a well-earned reputation as a fiercely devoted competitor, music, who craves winning basketball games above absolutely everything else in the world. But she also fully understands her extraordinary value and the deeply troubling idea of spending her highly anticipated sophomore campaign completely music, trapped inside a slow, suffocating, heavily restricted system under a rigidly controlling authority figure is something she was allegedly completely unwilling to passively and quietly tolerate. Music. But the genuinely shocking truth was that she was far from the only one examining this enormous, deeply questionable coaching shift with intense, profound skepticism because the rapidly escalating drama was about to aggressively drag in one of the most combustible, fiercely controversial figures the entire situation could possibly involve. The Indiana Fever currently carry a massive, completely undeniable, painfully visible problem that absolutely everyone across the basketball world can plainly identify, which is their desperate, immediate, critically urgent need for a true, legitimate enforcer. A tough, relentlessly gritty player who will fearlessly step up, aggressively talk trash, and physically shield their star point guard from the unrelenting, punishing, cheap shots, and brutally hard fouls that completely and entirely defined her exhausting rookie season. For several truly agonizing months, intense, non-stop trade rumors and enormous, music-free agency speculation have heavily and persistently linked the Indiana Fever front office, music, to Phoenix Mercury star Sophie Cunningham, a supremely talented player completely infamous for her extraordinarily fiery temper, totally music, unapologetic attitude, and absolute, undeniable refusal to ever back down from absolutely anyone, anywhere, music, at any point on the basketball court. Cunningham is the precise, specific type of player the Indiana roster so desperately and urgently needs right now. Someone who instantly delivers a gritty, deeply intimidating physical edge to an otherwise quiet locker room. Someone who will aggressively and immediately get directly in the face of any opponent who even dares to lay a heavy hand on Clark. And someone who genuinely and powerfully thrives in the chaotic, emotionally charged, incredibly tense moments that routinely and completely overwhelm younger, far less experienced teams. The Indiana fanbase was entirely and utterly consumed by the enormously appealing idea of adding Cunningham's lethal, pinpoint three-point shooting and absolutely ruthless perimeter defense to the existing roster, viewing her as the single perfect missing piece needed to finally transform the team from a highly talented collection of unproven youngsters into a genuinely terrifying, truly unstoppable championship powerhouse. But there exists a massive, deeply complicated catch to the entire Sophie Cunningham equation that makes this potential partnership explosively volatile and dangerously unpredictable, which is her thoroughly documented, deeply entrenched history of openly clashing with rigid, completely uncompromising authority figures, and her fierce, absolute hatred for being relentlessly micromanaged or firmly instructed to suppress her naturally aggressive, intensely emotional personality. She plays the game of basketball with pure, completely raw emotion, constantly drawing energy from the roaring home crowd and the overwhelming pressure of the moment, requiring a coach who will essentially unleash her, and fully allow her to simply be the ferocious enforcer she naturally and authentically is without constantly pulling her aside during crucial timeouts to harshly criticize her bold attitude or her aggressively confident shot selection. The very concept of Cunningham willingly joining a team entirely commanded by Stephanie White is fundamentally and conceptually disastrous on virtually every conceivable level because White's intense insistence on absolute, unwavering discipline and strict unquestioning obedience to a highly systematic, completely rigid game plan directly and completely contradicts absolutely everything that makes Cunningham such a dangerous, devastatingly effective, and enormously popular force on the hardwood.